The pipe was leaking again. Rail Dunn could smell it before he saw it, that sharp chemical bite of cooling fluid mixing with recycled station air. He had already fixed that same pipe twice this month. The Draxol Royal Transport was an old vessel, impressive in size, terrifying in appearance, but underneath all that armored black plating, it had the same problems as every other aging ship that docked at Vorna Station. Corroded joints, failing seals, pipes that gave up when no one was watching. He grabbed his kit and followed the smell. Rail was not a tall man. He was not a decorated soldier or a diplomat with a practiced smile. He was 34 years old, had grease permanently under his fingernails, and had spent the last 6 years fixing ships on Vorna Station, a neutral trade hub sitting at the edge of 3 different territorial borders. He had worked on human freighters, Yalani cargo haulers, Breck military scouts, and once, memorably, a poorish vessel where the entire engine room smelled like warm bread for reasons no one ever explained to him. He had never worked on a Draxol ship before this week. The Draxol were dragons, not in the storybook way, not winged creatures breathing fire over castles. They were large-scaled bipedal beings with heavy jaw structures, eyes that caught light like mirrors, and a history that stretched back further than most human civilizations could count. They stood nearly 3 meters tall. They lived for centuries. They ruled a significant portion of the galaxy's inner arm, and they did not, as a rule, allow strangers near their ships. But the transport's cooling system was failing, and the Draxol chief engineer had reluctantly admitted they did not carry the right replacement parts. Station Director Paul had sent Rail because Rail was the best, and because nobody else volunteered. He had been given access to the outer mechanical corridors only. That was the agreement. The leak, however, had other plans. The cooling fluid trail moved through the outer corridor, then curved left at a junction Rail was not supposed to pass. He stood at the threshold for a moment, looked at the yellow fluid spreading slowly across the floor, and made the practical decision. If the coolant reached the secondary power cells, the whole docking bay would need to be evacuated. He followed the trail. The corridor beyond was dim. The Draxol kept their interior lighting low. Their mirror eyes worked better in low light than in the bright white glow humans preferred. Rail clicked on his chest lamp and moved carefully, stepping over bundles of heavy cable and ducking under a crossbeam that was clearly not designed with human proportions in mind. The trail ended at a half-open chamber door. He pushed it open with his shoulder, eyes on the floor, following the fluid, and then his lamp swept up and he stopped. There was a dragon on the floor. Not standing, not sitting, lying on its side, massive and still, scales the color of dark copper and old bronze, chest rising in slow, shallow movements. One enormous clawed hand was curled loosely near its face. The chamber was empty of anyone else. No guards, no attendants, just the dragon alone on the floor of a dim room, breathing in a way that did not sound right. Rail's brain offered several options. Leave. Run. Go find someone with authority and a better understanding of dragon politics. His hands moved before his brain finished the list. He crossed the chamber in 8 steps, crouched beside the massive creature and pressed his palm flat against its side, just below the ribcage, the way you checked an animal for breathing, the way his father had taught him when they used to find injured dogs on the roadside when he was a child. He pressed gently and felt the slow rise and fall. Weak. Too slow. Easy, he said quietly, the word coming out before he decided to say it. I've got you. The dragon's eye opened. It was gold, a deep, still gold, like light trapped inside metal, and it was looking directly at him. Not with the dull confusion of an injured animal, with full, sharp, ancient awareness. Rail did not move his hand. He should have. He would think about that later. But in that moment, pulling away felt wrong, like dropping something fragile. So he stayed still and held the creature's gaze and tried to look like a person who had not just made a catastrophic mistake. Then the alarms went off. Not the slow, cycling warning tone of a coolant breach. The hard, urgent shriek of a security alert, 3 short bursts, repeating, getting louder. Boots on metal, many boots, moving fast. The chamber door crashed open behind him. Rail turned. 6 dragon royal guards stood in the doorway in full black armor, weapons raised, eyes fixed on him, on his hand specifically, still pressed against the side of the creature on the floor. Behind the guards, filling the corridor, were more figures, larger ones. Younger dragons in robes of deep red and silver, faces locked in expressions Rail could not read. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out for a long, strange moment, the kind of silence that had weight to it, that pressed against the ears. Then one of the robed dragons, tall, with a jaw set like carved stone, looked from Rail's hand to the dragon on the floor and back to Rail's hand. His mirror eyes went very wide. Rail looked down at his own palm, still resting gently on the creature's side. He looked back up. "Is this," he said carefully, "a bad time?" They put him in a room with no windows and 1 chair. The chair was clearly designed for a Draxal. It was too wide, too deep, and the seat came up to Rail's mid-thigh. He sat on it anyway, feet dangling slightly, and ate the protein bar he found in his jacket pocket while 6 royal guards stood outside the door and the entire station slowly fell into controlled panic. He could hear it through the walls. Raised voices in Draxal, a language that sounded like rolling stones and low thunder, moving back and forth in the corridor. Rapid footsteps. At one point, something heavy was knocked over and someone hissed sharply in what he was fairly confident was a royal swear word. Rail finished his protein bar and folded the wrapper neatly and put it back in his pocket. Roughly 40 minutes later, the door opened and Consul Petra Lind walked in. She was human, middle-aged, with the kind of posture that came from years of standing in rooms where everyone was taller than her and refusing to look small. She was still in her sleep clothes under a hastily thrown diplomatic jacket. Her face said many things at once, most of them unflattering toward Rail. She closed the door behind her and stared at him for a long moment. "You touched her," Petra said. "I thought it was an animal," Rail said. "You thought," Petra repeated slowly, "that an animal was on the royal floor, of the royal vessel, in the private royal chamber." The door was open. "Rail." The coolant trail went. "Rail." She pulled the other guard's stool from the corner and sat down and pressed both hands flat on her knees. The creature on the floor was Queen Vareth. She is the ruling monarch of the Draxal Empire. She controls 47 star systems. She has lived for 312 years, and you put your hand on her. Rail was quiet for a moment. "How is she doing?" Petra closed her eyes. "That is not the question we are dealing with right now." She explained it to him in pieces, the way you explain something to someone who had just accidentally started a diplomatic incident and was still processing the scale of it. In Draxal culture, the body of the ruling monarch was considered sovereign territory. No contact without formal invitation, not from attendants, not from family members outside of specific ceremonial contexts, not from anyone. The rules existed because Draxal rulers were both political leaders and spiritual anchors for their people. To touch one without permission was to either challenge their authority or, under a second and much older reading of the law, to make a claim. A claim of what, exactly, depended on which legal text Arbiter Nas was reading this hour. "He has been in the archive room since the alarm went off," Petra said, cross-referencing. "The problem is that every version of the law they have only covers Draxal touching other Draxal. You are not Draxal." "Clearly," Rail said. "So there is no direct precedent, which means the court has to interpret, and interpretation in Draxal law is decided by the High Arbiter with input from the royal family." She looked at him steadily. "Prince Soren wants you executed." Rail absorbed that. That seems like an overreaction. He is not wrong by the letter of what he knows. What you did, if a Draxal male had done it to the queen without invitation, would have been treated as a territorial dominance act, a challenge to the throne. But I was checking her breathing. I know that, you know that. The queen, Petra paused. The queen has not spoken publicly about the incident yet. Rael tilted his head. What does that mean? Under Draxal law, if the monarch does not formally reject a contact event within the first hour, it enters a different legal category, a gray space. Petra looked uncomfortable. The texts are apparently very old and not designed for situations like this. Down the corridor, the rolling thunder voices grew louder for a moment, then dropped again. "What is Prince Davin saying?" Rael asked. He had seen two robed dragons in the doorway. The one with the stone jaw had clearly been the angry one. The other had been quieter. Petra looked mildly surprised. He is arguing for patience. He wants to wait for the Arbiter's ruling before any action is taken. She paused. He also apparently asked one of the guards what a protein bar was after they found your wrapper on the chair. Rael almost smiled. In the royal conference chamber 3 corridors away, the argument was reaching its loudest point of the night. Prince Sorin stood at the head of the table with the certainty of someone who had always believed the universe ran on clear rules and clear consequences. He listed the violations. He listed the appropriate responses. He used the word honor 11 times in 4 minutes. Prince Davin sat at the far end of the table and said very little. When Sorin finished, Davin asked one question. If she had been found 3 hours later instead of now, what would we be discussing? Sorin did not answer. Arbiter Nas entered the room at that moment with 3 thick volumes under his arm, his reading lenses still on, and the expression of someone who had found something interesting and was not yet sure if interesting was good or bad. "I need more time," he said. Sorin turned to him. "How much time?" "The section I am currently reading," Nas said carefully, "was last cited in the court records 430 years ago. I want to make sure I understand it fully before I tell you what it means." The room went quiet. In his small chair in his windowless room, Rael Dunn looked at the ceiling and thought about the coolant pipe, which still, technically, needed fixing. The court chamber was not built to make anyone feel comfortable. That was clearly the point. The ceiling was high enough that the top was lost in shadow. The walls were black stone panels, etched with Draxal script that Rael could not read, running floor to ceiling in thin, precise columns. The floor was smooth and cold. At the far end sat a curved bench where the princes and 3 senior court officials were arranged in a row like a tide that had stopped moving and was waiting to crash. Rael walked in with Consul Petra Lind at his side, and a royal escort of 4 guards behind him. He was, by a wide margin, the shortest person in the room. He had washed his hands before coming, a decision Petra had called symbolic and Rael had called basic hygiene, and he was still wearing his work clothes because no one had offered him anything else. He stood in front of the bench with his kit bag at his feet and looked up at the row of dragon faces and waited. Arbiter Nas spoke first. He was older than the princes, with scales along his jawline faded to a pale gray, and he carried himself with the specific calm of someone who had seen a great many things go wrong and developed a system for thinking through them. "Rael Dunn," Nas said, "you are here to give account of your actions. Speak plainly. The court will hear you." Rael nodded. He did not clear his throat dramatically. He did not look at his feet. "I was following a coolant leak," he said. "The fluid trail moved past the authorized corridor boundary. I followed it because if cooling fluid reaches secondary power cells, the dock has to evacuate. I found an open door. I went through it. I found a large living creature on the floor breathing badly. I put my hand on its side to check the breath. Then I heard movement and I stayed still because pulling away fast near an injured animal can startle it." He paused. "That is everything." The chamber was quiet. Sorin leaned forward. You entered a restricted corridor. You breached a sealed chamber. You made physical contact with. The door wasn't sealed, Rael said. It was half open, and I didn't know it was a chamber. The corridor lighting was low. I was following the trail. You did not know, Soren said, his voice dropping to something flat and precise, that you were on a Draxol royal vessel, that any unmarked chamber door might contain. I knew I was on a Draxol royal vessel, Rael said. I did not know that an unmarked, unlocked, half-open door in a mechanical corridor led to a private royal room. In my experience, important rooms have closed and locked doors. Soren's jaw tightened. He has a point, Prince Davin said quietly from the far end of the bench. Soren turned his mirror eyes toward his brother with a look that suggested they would be discussing that later. Nas made a note. The court recognizes that the corridor access was not a deliberate breach. We moved to the contact itself. He looked at Rael. You placed your hand on the Queen's body. At any point after making visual contact, did you recognize the nature of the individual? No, Rael said, not until her eye opened. And then I held still, because she was already awake and moving my hand fast seemed like a bad idea. You were not frightened. Rael thought about it honestly. I was more worried about her than about me. The bench was quiet again. One of the senior officials, a narrow-faced dragon with rust-colored scales, was looking at Rael with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not anger, something closer to confusion. Soren spoke again. This is irrelevant. Intent does not erase action. The contact occurred. The law. The law, Nas said calmly, is what I am currently in the process of interpreting. Your opinion on the matter is noted, Prince Soren, and will be noted again when you repeat it, which I expect you will. Soren closed his mouth. Petra Lind stood slightly straighter beside Rael. He could feel her relief without looking at her. Nas turned back to Rael. One final question. When the guards entered the chamber, when you turned and saw the royal court behind you, what did you think? Rael answered without hesitating. I hoped she was going to be okay. The narrow-faced official looked down at his notes. Prince Davin was watching Rael with open curiosity, the way someone looks at a puzzle they haven't seen the shape of before. Soren was looking at the wall. Nas set down his writing instrument and folded his hands. The court will recess, he said. What I am reading in the archive requires careful consideration. This matter will resume when I am satisfied that I understand what I am working with. He looked at Rael steadily. You will remain on station grounds. You will not be harmed. You will go back to wherever you wait and you will wait. Rael picked up his kit bag. Can I fix the coolant pipe while I wait? The narrow-faced official made a sound. It might have been a cough. It might have been something else. No, Nas said, but there was something faintly different in his tone. Not warmth exactly, something adjacent to it. Rael nodded and walked out. In the chamber behind him, 3 corridors away and past 2 locked doors, Queen Vareth lay in her restored chamber with her attendants finally permitted back inside. The small audio receiver on her side table had been on since the hearing began. She had heard every word. She did not move for a long time. She stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly and thought about a human man crouching in the dark beside her, pressing one careful hand against her side, saying easy like it was the most natural thing in the world. The summons came at the 3rd hour of station night. A royal attendant knocked on the door of the small crew bunk they had moved Rael into after the hearing, an upgrade from the windowless room, though not by much. The attendant was young, with pale gold scales and the nervous posture of someone carrying a message they were not entirely sure would be well received. The Queen, the attendant said carefully, requests your presence. Rael set down the diagnostic tablet he had been reading. The coolant pipe was still technically his problem, and he planned to solve it eventually, and looked at the attendant for a moment. Does Consul Lin know about this? He asked. The request, the attendant said, was made privately. Rail considered that. Then he put on his jacket and followed. The path to the Queen's chamber went through 3 different corridors, past 2 guard checkpoints where the soldiers watched him with the focused attention of people who had been told to let him through and were doing so with visible reluctance. The ship felt different at night, quieter. The hum of the station's external systems was muffled here, replaced by the low vibration of the vessel's own idle machinery. Rail found himself listening to it the way he always listened to engines, reading the rhythm, looking for the skip or the catch that meant something needed attention. The Queen's chamber door was open this time, fully. He went in. Vareth was not on the floor. She was seated on a wide, flat resting platform along the far wall, upright, her copper and bronze scales catching the low amber light of the room's lanterns. She was larger than he remembered, or maybe lying down had made her seem smaller. She watched him cross the chamber with those gold mirror eyes, and she did not speak until he stopped a respectful distance away and waited. "You are not afraid," she said. Her voice was low and carried a resonance that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Her galactic standard was perfect. "A little," Rail said honestly, "but mostly I wanted to see if you were doing better." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It had a thinking quality to it. "Sit," she said, and gestured toward a low platform near the wall, something that served as a table or a seat depending on who needed what. Rail sat on it. 312 years, Vareth said, and no one has ever entered a room I was in without first requesting permission through no fewer than 4 separate protocols. She looked at him steadily. "You walked in because the door was open." "That's usually what an open door means," Rail said. "In your culture," she said. "In most cultures I've worked around," he said, "though the Yalani knock twice even on open doors, which I respect." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, dragon facial anatomy did not produce the same shapes as human faces, but something changed in the set of her jaw, a small release of held tension. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want an honest answer. Not a careful one, not a diplomatic one." "All right," Rail said. "When you found me on the floor, when you knelt beside me and put your hand on my side," she paused, "what did you think I was?" Rail was quiet for a moment. He thought back to the dark room, the smell of cooling fluid, his lamp sweeping up from the floor. "I thought you were something alive that was hurting," he said. "That was the whole thought, nothing after it." Vareth held his gaze, not the queen of the Draxal Empire. "I didn't know that yet. But after, when the eye opened, when you knew." "Then I thought the same thing," Rail said, "just with more context." She was quiet for a long time. The amber lanterns flickered once. Outside the ship, somewhere on the station, something distant and metallic shifted. "I am dying," Vareth said. The words came out plainly, without decoration, the way someone speaks a truth they have been carrying alone for too long and are finally setting down. Rail did not fill the silence immediately. He let it sit, the way his mother had always said you were supposed to let important things sit before you rush to cover them with words. "Does anyone else know?" he asked. "No one in my court, my personal physician, no one else." "How long have you known?" "Long enough that the decision not to tell them was no longer about timing," she said. "It became about something I do not like to name." "Pride," Rail said. She did not deny it. "Can it be treated?" he asked. "Possibly. There are procedures. They are not guaranteed. They require a period of significant weakness, during which I would not be able to hold court, perform the ceremonial functions, or project the image that keeps 47 systems from deciding to test their own strength against each other." She looked at him. "Draxal do not show their wounds, mechanic. We have not survived this long by appearing vulnerable." Rail leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "I grew up working on ships," he said. "You know what happens when a ship hides a fault, when it keeps running and doesn't show the warning signs because the system is configured to mask them. He looked up at her. At some point it fails completely, and it always fails at the worst possible moment, in deep space, during a storm, when there's no one close enough to help. Vareth was very still. Your court is going to lose you either way, Rael said quietly. The only question is whether they get a chance to prepare, whether you give them that. The gold eyes stayed fixed on him. Outside, the station hummed its steady nighttime hum. The lanterns held their amber glow. You are a mechanic, she said at last. Yes, Rael said. And yet you are the first person in 312 years to say that to me. Rael said nothing. He thought it was one of the saddest things he had ever heard. The full court session was called with 2 hours of notice, which in Draxal terms was almost offensive in its urgency. By the time Rael arrived, escorted again by the same 4 guards who were starting to feel familiar, the chamber was full. Not just the princes and the senior officials. There were junior court members, station representatives, 3 Draxal military officers in formal armor, and Consul Petra Lind standing near the back wall with the expression of someone mentally rehearsing apologies for situations they had not yet been told about. Rael stood in the same spot as before, same kit bag, same work clothes. Arbiter Nas entered last. He carried a single open volume this time, 1 page marked with a thin strip of red cloth. He set it on the stand in front of the bench, smoothed the page with one careful hand, and looked out at the room. I will be clear, he said, because this text is old enough that its language requires interpretation, and I do not wish for interpretation to become argument. I will state my conclusion first, then my reasoning. The room was very quiet. The contact made by Rael done upon the body of Queen Vareth falls under a category of Draxal law known as Vethseral. He let the word settle. This term translates most accurately as witnessed mercy. It describes an act performed upon the monarch's person without intent to harm or claim, witnessed by the monarch herself, in a moment of physical vulnerability. Nas touched the page. The category has not been invoked in 431 years. The last recorded case involved a Draxal palace worker who pulled the previous queen away from a collapsing structure during a building failure. The worker had no authorization to touch the queen. The queen, upon recovery, acknowledged the act. The court recognized Vethsaral. The worker was declared non-hostile and granted station protection for life. The room absorbed this. Soren was already on his feet. The precedent involves a Draxal individual acting on a Draxal monarch. The law was not written to accommodate. The law, Nas said with the patient firmness of someone who had expected this interruption, does not specify species. I checked 4 times. The legal text uses the term living being in every instance where it could have said Draxal and chose not to. He looked at Soren. I do not write the texts, Prince Soren. I only read them. Soren turned to the bench. Then we challenge the ruling. The queen has not formally acknowledged the act. Without her acknowledgement, the Vethsaral standard cannot be applied. She has not rejected it either, Davin said from his seat. Silence carries no legal weight. In this text, Nas said, lifting one hand, silence within the acknowledgement window carries full legal weight. The window closed 6 hours ago. The queen did not reject the contact. He closed the volume. However, the room shifted. However, Nas continued, Prince Soren has raised a point of challenge. A challenge of this kind, understanding court law, can only be resolved by the monarch herself. If the queen speaks to the court on this matter, her word supersedes all other interpretation. He looked toward the side entrance of the chamber. I took the liberty of informing her of that fact this morning. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the side door opened. Queen Vareth entered the court chamber for the first time since her collapse, and the entire room went still in the way that deep water goes still. Completely, instantly, as if motion itself had decided to wait. She moved slowly. That was the only visible sign. Rael, watching from the center of the room, could see it, the careful pace that was not her natural one. No one else might have noticed. Everyone else was looking at her face, her posture, the formal scale crest raised along her jaw that signaled full royal presence. She reached the head of the room and turned to face the court. "I will be brief," she said. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on her. Even the military officers in the back had gone straight and still. What was done without malice, without protocol, and without my invitation. She paused. It was also done without hesitation, without fear, and without any calculation of what it might cost. She looked directly at Rael for one moment, a single, clear look, and then returned her gaze to the court. In 300 years on the throne, I have been approached with careful words, formal gestures, and prepared statements. I have never been approached by someone whose only thought was whether I was breathing. She let that land. I acknowledge the act. I acknowledge Vethsarel. This matter is closed. Soren stood very still. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on the bench in front of him. "Mother," he began. "I did not ask for your opinion, Soren." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "Sit down." He sat down. The narrow-faced official near the end of the bench was definitely not hiding a reaction anymore. He was looking at his notes with the focused attention of someone who needed something to look at that was not the prince. Nas spoke. "By royal acknowledgement, Rael Dunn is declared non-hostile under Vethsarel. He carries station protection for the duration of his presence in Draxal space and may not be moved against by any member of this court. The ruling is final." In the back of the room, Consul Petra Lind let out a breath she had been holding for approximately 30 hours. Her knees felt temporarily unreliable. She put one hand on the wall quietly and composed herself. Rael stood in the center of the chamber with his kit bag at his feet. He looked at the queen. She had already turned away, moving toward the exit at her careful, deliberate pace. But just before the side door closed behind her, she paused. She did not look back. She did not say anything. She simply paused, one breath, maybe two, and then she was gone. Rael picked up his kit bag. Davin caught his eye from the bench and gave him a look that Rael was fairly sure, despite every cultural and biological difference between them, meant, "Well done." Rael nodded once and walked out of the chamber, and went to find the coolant pipe, which absolutely needed to be fixed before the morning shift. The pipe took 40 minutes to fix properly. Rael replaced the failing joint seal, flushed the residual coolant from the line, repressurized the system, and ran a diagnostic cycle twice just to be sure. The second cycle came back clean. He packed his tools, marked the repair in the station log, and sat on an empty cargo crate for a while, listening to the ship breathe around him. His coworker Mecca found him there. Mecca was Breck, a species that looked, to most human eyes, like someone had built a person out of old bark, and then given it excellent hearing. He was Rael's closest colleague on Vorna Station, and had been sending increasingly frantic messages to Rael's comm badge for the past day and a half. He stood in the corridor entrance, looked at Rael sitting quietly on the cargo crate with his clean hands and his packed kit, and spread his outer barkarms wide in the Breck gesture that translated roughly as, "Explain yourself immediately." "Plumbing," Rael said. Mecca made a sound like a tree in wind. "Rael, I have heard 4 different versions of what happened on this ship from 4 different people in the last 30 hours, and none of them make sense. 2 of them involved you challenging the Dragon Queen for territorial rights. One of them involved you performing a human mating ritual on the Queen's person. That one is not accurate. I assumed, but I need you to tell me what actually happened." Rael looked at him. "I followed a leak, found someone hurt, checked if they were breathing." Mecca's outer barkarms lowered slowly. "That is it." "That is it." Mecca stared at him for a long moment. Then he sat down on the floor of the corridor in the way Breck did when they needed to process something, cross-legged, still, eyes half closed. He stayed like that for about 20 seconds. "Humans," he said finally, with a tone that covered a wide range of emotional territory in a single word. He was still sitting there thinking about it when footsteps came down the corridor, lighter than a royal guard, heavier than an attendant. Rael looked up. Prince Davin stood at the corridor junction, alone, without his court robes. He was wearing something simpler, dark-fitted wraps that Rael recognized as the Draxal equivalent of informal clothes. He looked younger without the formal layers, and more curious, the way he always seemed when Sauron was not in the room. Mecha opened his eyes, saw a dragon prince, closed his eyes again, and decided not to be part of whatever this was. Davin looked at Rael. "I wanted to speak with you without the court." "All right," Rael said. Davin stepped into the corridor and stood near the wall, away from the crate. He did not crouch or sit. He was not built for either in a low-ceiling corridor, but he angled his body in a way that reduced his presence, which Rael thought was a considerate thing to do. "How do humans do it?" Davin asked. He said it the way someone asks a question they have been holding back. "Do what?" Rael asked. "Act without calculating first." Davin's mirror eyes moved over Rael's face, not with aggression, with genuine study. "Soren spent 2 hours last night arguing that your action proved humans are dangerous because you cannot be predicted, that you act without reason." "What do you think?" Rael asked. "I think you acted with reason," Davin said. "I just think your reason was different from ours. You did not ask what the cost was. You did not think about what the action would mean for your position, your standing, your safety." He paused. "You just moved." "Something needed doing," Rael said, "so I did it." Davin was quiet for a moment. Outside the ship, the station was waking up, the gentle shift change sounds of a working port beginning its day cycle. "My mother," Davin said, "has agreed to begin treatment." Rael went still. "She made the decision last night," Davin continued. "She told the physician this morning. She told me an hour ago." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, the specific texture of relief that has been held in tension for too long. "She has been refusing treatment for over a year. We did not know she was ill. When she told me this morning, she also told me why she changed her mind." He looked at Rael. "She said a mechanic told her that a ship which hides its faults always fails at the worst possible moment." Rael did not say anything. "She is telling the court today," Davin said. "Formally. She is going to tell them she is ill and that she will be stepping back from active throne duties during treatment. She has asked me to serve as acting regent." He paused. "She said she would rather give her people the chance to prepare than give them a collapse with no warning." Rael looked at the floor. He thought about a dragon queen alone in a dark room, 300 years old, proud past the point of sense, choosing finally to let something difficult be true out loud. "She's going to be okay," Rael said. He did not know if it was true, but he said it like he believed it because sometimes that mattered. "We do not know yet," Davin said honestly. "But she has decided to try. That is more than we had 2 days ago." He straightened then, the formality of his bearing returning quietly, like a coat settled back onto shoulders. "The diplomatic office received a communication this morning," Davin said, "from our Foreign Affairs Division, preliminary language, a request to open an exploratory channel with human space." He looked at Rael. "It is not a treaty. It is not an alliance. It is one door opened one small distance." "That's a good start," Rael said. Davin made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but it was close to one. He inclined his head once, formally, then turned and walked back up the corridor, footsteps fading into the general noise of the waking station. Mecha opened his eyes. He looked at the space where the dragon prince had been. He looked at Rael. He looked at the repaired pipe on the wall. "You followed a leak," Mecha said. "Yep," Rael said. "And now there is a diplomatic channel between human space and the Draxal Empire." "Apparently." Mecha closed his eyes again. "Humans," he said, in exactly the same tone as before, which somehow covered even more emotional territory this time. Rail picked up his kit bag and stood and stretched his back. "Come on," he said. "Bay 12 has a fuel line that needs looking at." Mecha unfolded himself from the floor and followed. Behind them the repaired pipe held steady. No leaks, no warning signs, everything for now running exactly as it should.